Hello, welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, a therapist who's been in practice for 25 years working with thousands of patients. This channel is my opportunity to offer you a wide variety of wellness tips to help you thrive. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the use of timeout as a strategy for couples during arguments and conflicts, why I think it's a golden skill to have in your relationship toolbox, but also why a lot of couples can't practice it, why it fails when they try to practice it. And I'm going to give you the pro tip of how to fix that. Stay tuned. Okay, so in today's video, I want to talk about the use of timeout during conflicts and arguments for couples. I think this is an absolutely golden skill. It's definitely a skill that couples should have in their relationship skills toolbox. And I say this partly because when I have worked with couples who naturally use timeout during their conflicts, the reports are that it is such a boon for helping them not escalate to the point of derailing their attempts to negotiate complex issues in their relationship, and also avoiding getting into that high code red escalation of conflicts that, as you may know, can result in actual damaging actions during the conflict itself. So, definitely something to avoid. Now, the reason that I think timeout is so valuable for couples is that when we're in a conflict and our stress level gets triggered and we go up beyond code green and yellow into code orange or code red, part of the problem with that is when one or both people in a conflict are at code orange or red, half of their brain is shut off, and the half that's still working is not actually working well, right? So when our stress level goes up, once it gets past a certain threshold and we're into code orange toward code red, the positive parts of our brain actually get inhibited. They get shut down by the stress response. And the negative parts of our brain get lit up, right? This is just part of the fight or flight response. But it does not work in our favor in the middle of an argument, right? It derails the argument. It produces bad outcomes. It certainly does not lead to a satisfying outcome of the conflict, right? So, timeout is useful because when one person in the argument realizes that they or the other person are escalating beyond code yellow into code orange, that's the time where they can take a timeout. And if you take a timeout successfully at that point in the escalation of the conflict, that means that both parties have the opportunity to cool off, which means coming back down to code yellow or even toward code green. And when you come back down into yellow and green, the positive parts of your brain come back online. And you need those parts of your brain to work for you in the middle of trying to negotiate complex issues between you and your partner. You need that. It is essential. If that part of your brain goes offline, you're going to fail, right? Right? You're just going to have a much harder time resolving the conflicts. So taking a timeout is a way to take a long enough break for you to come back down and get the positive part of your brain back online and get the negative parts of your brain to cool off and become less active so that then you can productively focus on negotiating toward a mutually satisfying solution for whatever the argument happens to be. The problem, though, is that there are some people who have developed the skill to use timeout and use it effectively. There's some people who have developed it and who just aren't using it as much as they should. And if you're in that group, I just say use it more often and you'll be more satisfied. But what I've encountered during my career is that there are a lot of couples who intellectually know that it's a good idea, and maybe one person tries to do it, but they don't do it effectively. And so in that last group, I think there are two types of couples. One is where one or both people have a passive use of timeout, meaning that they just shut down. We sometimes talk about the fight or flight responses, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. So with freeze and fawn, if you're that type, you are likely to just shut down. So you're kind of inducing a timeout in the argument, but it's not exactly the same as what I'm aiming for in terms of the optimal use of the timeout, because typically if one person just shuts down, the other person is still active, maybe aggressively active, and that risk of doing something damaging in the middle of that argument still pertains. So the timeout in an optimal way is for people to use it so that you actually get an optimal result and avoid that risk of having damaging things happen in the middle of the argument, right? So the other type is people who have tried timeout and it just fails. And part of what I learned in the early part of my career, when I first started working with families, I started working with couples. So basically, more than one person in the room for the therapy, so you have some sort of active dynamic and you're dealing with the dynamic of the people. One of the things I found is that when I would suggest that people practice timeout, people instantly see the value of it. Oh, yeah, we should time out when we have an argument. But repeatedly, I had people come back to me, in the next session and say, yeah, I tried that. I tried calling timeout and it totally failed. So I listened to why it failed for people and figured out why the practice of timeout, if you aren't already doing it effectively and it's not part of what naturally works for you in your relationship and you want to implement it, here's why it fails. And also, here's how to fix it, okay? The reason that it fails is that one person calls the timeout and the other person hears that as shut up, which is not a particularly satisfying thing to hear in the middle of an argument, right? Because once the argument has gotten started, your brain says, this is urgent, we've got to solve this, right? Because when the stress response goes up, sense of urgency goes up. So you're really focused and you have that sense of urgency, even if it's not objectively urgent. Like you could drop it for a few minutes or an hour or maybe indefinitely, and the world will keep turning. But your brain says, the house is on fire, we got to act, right? That's that sense of urgency that happens that drives people forward, even when the way they're going forward is not productive at all and maybe even disastrous, right? So when someone calls timeout, the basis of the calling of the timeout is actually a good thing because, one reason that timeout is a good strategy for couples is that, when you have two people in a relationship, part of the value of a healthy relationship is the synergy between the two people, meaning that if I and my partner are interacting, there is a combined synergistic wisdom of the two of us, which is a non-zero sum game. So the wisdom of a healthy couple is more than 1 + 1 = 2, because the synergy of how they interact means that the wisdom of person A contributes to the dynamic of the interactions between A and B, and thus adds something that's very valuable, right? Put in more practical terms, if my wife tells me, hey, calm down and take a break, she may think of that before I do or before I'm willing to act on it. And her suggesting that and supporting me and going ahead and taking that break means that our combined wisdom leads to a better outcome. See what I'm getting at? So timeout is one of the ways that couples actually work with and express and benefit from their combined wisdom. But the problem, again, is that when one person uses their wisdom, so the basis of it is good, it does not land effectively, and the other person hears it as shut up, which is just more incitatory and often will cause the person to escalate more, certainly not stop and take the healthy, productive type of timeout that I'm talking about in this video. or the people feel like a miserable failure, like we're dropping this, and basically it's not exactly timeout, it's code for we don't want to deal with this, right? Which again is not pointed toward a what's likely to be a mutually satisfying solution. Because for timeout to really work the way you want it to work, it has to not be used when you really do mean shut up, I don't want to deal with you and I don't want to deal with this. It has to be used only when you really think timeout, we've escalated into code orange and we should take some time to cool off so that we can come back to this later at point X later, whatever that means, 5 minutes, an hour, tomorrow. We're going to come back to this later when we can both do this productively, right? That's the type of timeout that is actually very, very helpful. So the reason that my suggestion to people to experiment with adding timeout to their dynamic failed, why they come back and said, we tried it, one of us tried it, and it totally failed, is that when they did that, they had not agreed to do it beforehand in a way that set it up for success, and they had not practiced it in a way that made it happen in the moment in an acceptable way. And what I mean by that is if I say to you, hey, I want the two of you to practice timeout when you have a conflict, and then you have a conflict and it's escalating, and if one of you says timeout at the appropriate time when at least one of you is escalating beyond code yellow into code orange or toward code red, that's a really difficult time to actually have a new strategy occur. And this isn't true of just timeout. Other types of relationship skills work this way too. Even if you think it's a good idea, even if you know exactly how to execute the maneuver, if you pull it out and try to use it in a new way in the middle of a relatively high conflict over something that actually matters to one or both of you, it tends to fail. So the advice I'm giving about how to make timeout work in this video is also good advice about other types of relationship strategies. And so you might generalize this to other things you're trying to do in your relationship to improve how you communicate and negotiate and deal with conflicts. But here's the trick. If you want timeout to work, you have to practice it multiple times when both of you are not above code yellow. So put another way, you have to practice it when you're at code green and when you're at code yellow only, not at code orange, not at code red, because then it becomes familiar, okay? Because if I'm at code green and my wife is at code yellow in a conflict and I say, hey, time out, let's take a break, because she's at code yellow, she can hear that and accept it and work with it, even if she's a little disgruntled in the moment, right? Now, if one of us calls time out and the other one is already at code orange or toward code red, it's going to fail, right? So if you practice it multiple times, and by multiple times, I'm really talking about like 6 times to a dozen times, which is a little cumbersome, I know, but the value is so great of actually getting this to work that I strongly urge you to put up with the chore of this silly advice that I'm giving you in this video, because once you get time out to actually work in your relationship and you get it to work in the way that then one of you pulls it out and uses it in the middle of an actual argument that actually matters where you're escalating into code orange, then it's going to work. It's going to stick and it becomes a relationship skill that you will then enjoy for the rest of your relationship. It's so valuable. So here's the practical way to practice it if you too want this to work for you. Right now, if you're watching this by yourself and you want your partner to also get on board with this experiment, what you should do is have your partner also then watch this video with you later and watch the whole video together, because then you'll hear the same advice and you'll understand what the plan is. But here's what you do. When you are both at code green, you are going to arbitrarily decide to argue about something that is completely trivial, meaning that it's not the kind of issue that's likely to actually trigger each of you very much and move you beyond code yellow, even if you do get to code yellow. So, for example, I was working with a couple recently and we were talking about this very topic, and their homework assignment was to go home, and the next time one of them was going to the store, I wanted them to select an item and argue about it. So, for example, there was crackers on the list of things to buy at the store. They were going to buy, and they tend to buy Triscuits. And so what I said was, Triscuits come in 10 different flavors. So next time you're going to the store, you're going to buy Triscuits. I want you to argue about which flavor of Triscuit you're going to buy, right? Now, for most couples, that is something that probably will keep them at code green. Maybe we'll get them to code yellow. If arguing about Triscuits gets you to code orange or red, you need to see a couples therapist, right? But, pick something silly like that and literally say, well, I want the avocado flavored Triscuit. No, I want the plain Triscuit. No, we should just not buy Triscuits at all. However, you're going to have this contrived, silly argument. And then in the middle of it, one of you calls timeout. Now, because you're practicing with a silly point of focus that really isn't going to turn into a big major argument, when you call timeout for this practice session, you're going to take a short timeout. Now, later, once you start using it in situations that really matter, the timeout interval will matter based on the context, like what's going on in that moment, which may be 5 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe let's come back to this tomorrow kind of thing. But you're not going to do that if you're arguing over crackers. If you're arguing over crackers and you delay it till tomorrow, it's not going to make a lot of sense, and it's not actually the kind of practice I want you to do. So basically, you pick a silly argument that's totally arbitrary and silly, and you can blame this on me, right? Say, okay, we're doing this. It's super silly. It's so silly I can almost not stand it, but let's blame it on John because he's a crazy therapist. Okay, so that's one way to create an excuse in your head to make this make some sort of sense in order for you to actually do the practice, right? So you two decide during the next week or two, we're going to do at least 6 practice sessions of one of us picking something really silly. We're going to create a kind of contrived, silly argument about it. In the middle of it, one of us is going to call timeout, and we're going to take 5 minutes and then come back and finish the discussion about the silly thing that we decided to argue about, okay? And I don't want, in this practice of the at least 6 times that you're going to do this, I don't want it to be the same person who calls the timeout all 6 times, okay? You have to trade off. Even if in your normal dynamic, it's probably going to work out that there's one of you who tends to initiate the timeout before the other one, or maybe even one of you who's going to exclusively do it in general. But for this practice, I want both of you to do it some of the time. So if you do 6 arguments, the person who tends to not initiate this kind of response, I want you to do at least 2 of the 6, and the other person can do the other 4. Okay? So in the next week or two, 6 times at least, you are going to arbitrarily choose to argue about something that's absolutely silly. And shortly into the argument, one of you is going to call timeout, and then you're going to take 5 minutes and then come back and finish the silly argument. Okay? What this does is it desensitizes you to the other person calling timeout and you having to perceive that and then respond and then shut up and say, okay, yeah, let's take time out. It desensitizes you to that because it familiarizes you with that as one of the possible maneuvers that one of you is going to do, and then both of you are going to respond to in the middle of a negotiation, okay? You need to desensitize yourself to that because the time to start practicing the desensitization to timeout is not in the middle of a high stakes argument where one of you is already up to code orange or red. That is not the time to initiate the first practice of this change in the dynamic of your relationship. Because if you do that, as I said, it's going to fail. That's why I hear back from couples who try it that way, that it failed and then they abandoned it and then they lose the value, the golden value of using timeout in their relationship, which is what I want for you. I want you to have this tool in your toolbox. And the path to it, as I see it, maybe there's another way to do this. And if I learn of another way, I will make another video about it and share it. But in 25 years of practice, this is the one that I have learned that actually works. when people do it. Now, people often won't do it because they think it's too silly, or they're not committed enough to follow through with the practice or whatever. But when people actually do this, they come back and report that actually worked. We actually learned how to start using timeout in our conflicts, and then they get the benefits of having this golden tool in their toolbox, okay? So again, pick silly arguments, argue about them, call timeout, and come back, right? Now, again, one important thing is in real practice, once you start using timeout, if you want your partner to trust you when you call a timeout, that timeout really does mean let's pause and come back to this later. You have to be trustworthy. And to be trustworthy with the use of timeout, that means if you say timeout and we're going to come back to this later, you have to come back to it later. Because if you use timeout and you don't come back to it later, then you're really programming your partner to hear timeout as shut up, I don't want to deal with this. That is not a good use of timeout. That's not going to result in your partner respecting it and actually following your advice when you call the timeout. So you have to differentiate timeout versus shut up, I'm really not going to be dealing with this, which is a little hard because it actually takes courage to confront the use of shut up, because shut up has its place in relationships. It just does. It's a non-zero amount of the time that the honest answer is, I really do not want to deal with this, whatever it is, at this time. And I'm not calling a timeout. I'm saying I don't want to deal with this, okay? It takes courage to differentiate shut up from timeout and then only use timeout when you really mean timeout. But I want you to try to do that to the extent that you can, and then experiment with using timeout in the way that I described, and then only use timeout when it really means timeout. We're going to take a break and come back to this because, again, you have to be trustworthy with the use of the practice or it's going to fail again. Okay? So hope this is helpful. If you like this kind of content, hit the like button below because it helps YouTube learn who to share these videos with. And if you like the channel, feel free to subscribe because that helps me know, that people are supporting the channel. And feel free to leave comments below because that gives me information about the types of videos that people who are watching this channel might want to see and that I can make in the future. So thanks for joining me today, and I will see you soon.